In progress.
All right, folks, welcome everyone. My name is Amanda Demmer. I'm the program coordinator for Community-Based Research Canada, and I'm the moderator for the session today. Today in our Moving the Dial series, we're having a panel discussion with the folks from the North End Connect project. So this project really aims to bridge the digital divide and therefore reduce the inequities that it causes, specifically within the North End of Winnipeg. So this presentation is brought to you by Community-Based Research Canada. The CBRCanada Secretariat is situated on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We're a membership-based organization with a mission to advance community-based research and excellence in Canada by strengthening partnerships, building capacity, mobilizing knowledge, and championing community-based research. We are a social enterprise funded entirely by our member base. We have over 50 members now, ranging from institutional, organizational members to individual members. Part of the programming that we offer to our members are these webinars, as well as our communities of practice and other events, which you can learn about on our website. In the spirit of reconciliation, we open each e-learning event by reflecting on and amplifying the goals of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action. So this month, I'm highlighting call to action number 7, which is we call upon the federal government to develop with Indigenous groups a joint strategy to eliminate educational and employment gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. This seemed like a relevant call to action to highlight today as we're talking about the digital divide and equity, and specifically looking at that with relation to the North End and Indigenous folks within Winnipeg. CBRCanada is committed to continual reflection on the interconnections between truth and reconciliation and the various topics that we can approach using community-based research. Today's e-learning event will be a panel discussion, so a little bit of a different format if you're used to coming to our events. Also of note, if you were used to our events in the past, we have a new format now where we no longer have a live discussion attached to these events. If you are missing that live discussion component that you used to get here, we encourage you to join our community of practice events, where it's all about letting folks connect with each other and discuss topics related to our e-learning series events. So today we'll be having this panel discussion with 3 key members of the North End Connect project team. I'll be facilitating this panel and asking the team questions about their project. We really want to encourage all of you to participate in this panel discussion as well. So to do that, I'll ask you that at any time during the presentation, if a question comes to your mind, please post it in the chat box. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. I'll be reading out the questions that come in and asking them to our panel discussionists. So again, please enter questions in the chat box anytime throughout this presentation, this panel discussion. I'll keep track of your questions and ask as many of them as we can get to our presenters. We do ask folks to keep their microphones muted through the event just to prevent any background noise. You may have also noticed there was something that popped up at the beginning there. We are recording this event, and the recording of the event will be available on our website so that you can share it with other folks who might be interested and who missed this event. So before I introduce the panelists and pass things over to them today, the North End Connect team has asked me to share a video with you all that'll show the impact that their project has had in their community. So I'm going to play this video now. I'll then introduce the team, who will provide some further context into their organizations and their roles before we get into the panel discussion. We did test this in advance and hopefully the audio works, but if for any reason the audio is not working in the video, just shoot me a message in the chat, or Joel and Shelley, your cameras are on, just give me a wave. I'll also paste the link to this video in the chat for folks who want to revisit it later or share it with others.
So something like the North End Connect project is so incredibly important. And in today's day and age, if you don't have the ability to buy a computer or attain a device of some sort, you really are being left behind.
I think that people believe that in an urban center, especially a capital city like Winnipeg, there would be nowhere where connectivity was a problem. I don't think people necessarily know that it's a problem.
So we're going to be heading to the North End to be delivering the refurbished desktop computers. Our first one is an Indigenous elder, and so they'll be receiving a desktop today to get some connectivity and to be able to connect. There's Glenn. Hello, Glenn. We got your computer for you. Yeah.
Everything now is done online, lots of things, like even accessing your social services accounts, staying connected to family and friends, even just getting the word about programming, resources, events going on in the community. And so having those digital literacy skills to be able to gain access to those is really important so they can be connected and just a way to end that digital divide.
My current situation, I do not have access to computer, to internet, to Wi-Fi, or even a cell phone. Well, what happened was I became homeless a few months ago, and I lost all of that, all of those devices. One of the biggest barriers right now is just having no access, because everything's all computer now. Your bank account, you know, job applications, resumes, everything's all computer. So that was one of the hardest things for me to get back on my feet.
We have delivered 125 computers. So the main goal is to have a no-cost internet service, or at least low cost.
What we're looking at right now is a fixed wireless solution, which just means that we're going to use antennas from a rooftop to rooftop to get the signal from downtown Winnipeg into the North End and then to spread it from there. We're starting with a couple of key rooftops along Selkirk Avenue, which is kind of right through the center of the community. And we're connecting back to downtown Winnipeg. Right in the heart of downtown Winnipeg, there's our antennas that connect to the internet exchange point, and then from there directly to the internet. So we're bypassing any kind of commercial internet provider. After the physical connecting of the residences and we start getting some users on board, we'll need to switch to a kind of a training mode where funding is brought in to increase digital literacy. So kind of the basic user who needs to know how to use basic software or how to connect on video, online banking, those basic skills are part of our scope as well.
So our goals are to have our whole project led by community. It's not us coming in and being like, here, we're giving you a solution. This is all going to be, it's all community based. We want the community involved and to take it over.
And the one thing that the North End absolutely has and has always had is an extremely strong sense of community. Lots of community organizations, lots of nonprofits in the area that are doing great work on things other than connectivity. So we're adding into that and having more connectivity for community members will also help those organizations because they'll be able to have better connections with their clients and provide more services.
My hope is that everybody in the North End will have a connection of some point, some sort, either through this project or through other means, and that everybody in the North End and every area of the city will have a digital device in their home if they need one.
You know, it'll help the community as a whole, I think, because it's kind of funny when all the businesses close, you see all these little hotspots, and you see people from the community. Uh-oh, 3 over there, 4 over there. You try to find a quiet hotspot. But it's true. It's a reality. You come here in the evening, you'll see people standing outside the businesses just to have that connection. And I think it's really important. And I'd like to be part of that, you know, whether it's handing out computers or signing people up or even delivering computers. I was hoping to be part of the instruction part of the program. But we'll see what happens. I'm hopeful. So it's a good thing that you guys are doing this. This community really, really needs it.
All right. So that video really highlights the outputs of this research project, which have culminated in this North End Connect project. We've seen some of the successes of the story throughout that video. So I'm now honored to be introducing today's panelists, who will be able to tell us a little bit more about the community-based research project that has led to this, as well as, you know, what these outputs have looked like for them, how they've been moving the dial on social equity and connectivity in the digital divide. So the panelists today are Joel Templeman, who's the Executive Director of the Internet Society Manitoba chapter and Project Manager for the North End Connect initiative. Joel's a former public school teacher, retired major in the Canadian Armed Forces, who now works as an education specialist and a consultant, helping to bring technology to classrooms and helping to bring IT and cybersecurity to small nonprofit businesses. Shelley Anderson is the coordinator for Indigenous Vision for the North End. Shelley is an Anishinaabe woman from the Rousseau River Anishinaabe First Nation on Treaty 1 territory, and she now works to promote community engagement and empowerment in the North End of Winnipeg through her work at Indigenous Vision North End. Ashton King is an intern for Computers for Schools Manitoba and a digital navigator for the North End Connect project. Ashton's previously worked with Arctic Research Foundation to develop databases and web applications for their projects. Now works with schools or for Computer for Schools Manitoba, where he works to maintain an organized warehouse, help to refurbish old devices for distribution, and also works with North End Connect to help prepare the hardware and the software needed for this project. So I'm now going to stop my screen share. We'll see all the panelists up on the screen. They'll provide a little bit more introduction to themselves and their organizations, and then we'll get into the panel discussion.
Excuse me. Hello. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for having us. We're very excited to give this presentation. This has been a project since the beginning of the discussion, probably 2020, the earliest parts of the pandemic when the first discussions were had, and there's been a lot of work done since then. So we're excited to share. Just give you a little bit of a background of the roles and the groups that are part of this. It's a very extensive network partnership, but there's kind of 4 primary partners that started this and that have been involved since the beginning that we'll highlight. And specifically, Shelley and I, Indigenous Vision for the North End and the Internet Society Manitoba chapter were the 2 main groups involved in the research portion of the project. So. The Internet Society is an international organization. It's a nonprofit that supports and promotes open access to the internet all over the world. And it does a great deal of that work through its chapters. So in Canada, there are 3 chapters currently. There is a Canada chapter out of Ottawa. There's a Quebec chapter out of Montreal. And now there is a Manitoba chapter headquartered in Winnipeg. There's room for more. If anyone's interested, there's definitely lots more work to be done. But the chapters basically focus on kind of on the ground work, this type of research, this type of community network project is the way that the Internet Society kind of actually brings policy and things like that into action. So our role in this is to bring technical expertise into the project. The project management itself is kind of our role as well. And outside funding. There's a number of routes to funding in the technical community that we have that the other partners don't have. Something that we started in the early conversations was there are a lot of nonprofits in the North End, and we didn't want to be fishing in the same pond when it came to funding. So bringing in outside sources of funding is an important aspect of our role in the project as well. So that's basically where the chapter comes in. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. So Indigenous Vision for the North End's role in the project. So a little bit about IVNI, that's what we call it for short, is IVNI. So we're a coalition of 11 different organizations in the North End, so supporting them in the work they do. And so like Joel said, starting in 2020, some of the coalition members came together and saw the need and the digital divide that the North End faces. And so IVNI's 4 main pillars that we do are community, connecting and convening, making relationships, and culture. And so that's what we bring to the project, is the community side. So having those important relationships with community members and organizations, and just bringing community together.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm with Computers for Schools or Computers for Schools Manitoba specifically. We're part of a much larger umbrella, Computers for Schools Plus, which covers the entirety of Canada. There's a Computers for Schools in each province and territory. But right now I'm speaking specifically on behalf of Computers for Schools Manitoba. We are a nonprofit organization who hand out roughly 5,000 computers to a variety of different people, including schools, other nonprofits, post-secondary students, Indigenous services, Indigenous peoples, public libraries, as well as literacy students and mature students. We hand out lots of equipment to lots of people so that they can have that internet connectivity that we were speaking about before. So our role specifically in the North End Connect project has to do with providing the hardware as well as some of the technical work and expertise to get things going. So my role specifically is setting up cables and setting up the actual hardware and software needed for the project to run successfully.
Okay, that's 3 of 4. The fourth primary partner, I guess, is Broadband Communications North. It is an Indigenous-owned nonprofit internet service provider in Winnipeg, and the majority of their work is done in northern Manitoba. They generally service the toughest to service locations with satellite and fixed wireless fiber optics. They do all of the service that they can. And in this project, they are bringing the internet provider support side of it to us. And we're doing that also in partnership with the Manitoba Internet Exchange and less.net. If later in the discussion, and if there's any questions in the chat, we can dive into the technical side as much as you want, but we're going to focus more on the research side. But there is, I just wanted to get you some general idea of kind of what's behind the scenes when it comes to rooftop antennas, how we're getting the signal from place to place, the people involved. That's Ashton on his knees there, putting a cable on to get those antennas up and running. That happened in the last couple of weeks. And then just kind of a look at how Winnipeg is laid out and why wireless is an option for us. So we can get into that if you're interested, but that's the fourth of the 4 partners. None of this would be possible without some cash. The research itself, which went on for more than a year, probably from the earliest parts of it until just wrapping it up. We're just in the final steps of publishing a paper on all of it, but all of the rest of it has been concluded. But the Manitoba Research Alliance funded it through a SSHRC grant, specifically looking at community-driven solutions to poverty, challenges, and possibilities. So connectivity obviously is a huge factor in that. So we're grateful to the support and the funding that we got through the Manitoba Research Alliance, and specifically Dr. Shauna McKinnon and Dr. Julie Chamberlain from the University of Winnipeg Urban and Inner City Studies program. Their campus is actually located right in the heart of the North End on Selkirk Avenue at Merchants Corner, where our servers are and where those antennas are. So they've been integral in the process, and we thank them for it. That's all I have for this. I'm going to stop sharing this part. go back to our pretty faces and go.
All right. Thanks for that context. Shelley and Joel and Ashton. Again, it's so interesting to hear kind of how all these partners have come together to pull off this program you've been running in North End Connect, bringing the internet connectivity as well as the computers, as well as the knowledge and the training to folks in the North End of Winnipeg. So I'm going to jump into a panel discussion now. So I'll start by kind of asking some questions to our panelists here. And again, I encourage everyone here, if questions have already come up for you watching that video or hearing what Ashton or Shelley or Joel have had to say, please put your questions in the chat. If questions come up as I ask my questions and we get into our discussion, again, please share those in the chat. We'll try to get to as many questions from all of you as we can throughout this panel discussion. I want to start off just digging into the research behind all of this. So Joel, you mentioned that, the research project went on for about a year, is concluding now. And Shelley, in the video, one of the things you mentioned was that you really wanted this project to be led and driven by the community and their own solutions instead of you coming and bringing those solutions to folks through your programming. So I'm wondering, now that we've seen the success of the outputs of your research, the success of the North End Connect project, if you can speak a bit about the research that shaped this and that led to you approaching it the way that you did.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this was important. It was a critical part of this. I won't even sugarcoat it. If we didn't do it this way, I think we would have been unsuccessful for sure, and probably handed our hat and our coat and shown the door pretty quickly. The intent from the very beginning, we knew there was a problem, and actually it was the community that came to us with it. So there's one of the groups that is part of Indigenous Vision for the North End. They're called CEDA. They're a community. They deal with education in the community, a lot of mentoring, a lot of youth programming. And when the pandemic hit, obviously they were, hugely impacted, and their students were hugely impacted by having to do schooling at home and the lack of connectivity and the lack of devices and things. So they brought those concerns to us. But what we were looking at, we knew that this has been a problem for a very long time, and it wasn't about to change anytime soon. So instead of kind of focusing on a short-term solution, we proposed that we would look at this as a long-term project, that we would try to figure it out. But we really needed to figure out what the problem and the root causes were, because it was very complex. This isn't something that you could just simply fix in a day, or even throw money at. I mean, money is obviously an issue, but it wasn't that. So we needed to really understand the nuances of the problem. And so we figured that the answers to that would become the kind of business case for any future action. We needed to really kind of go backwards before we could go forwards. We needed to consult with the community. We needed to find out why things weren't working, because this isn't like a rural connectivity problem where you're in the middle of, a vast distance and there's mountains and trees in the way. We're in downtown Winnipeg, capital city. There are connectivity, lots of places in the city where there's fiber to the home, no problem with connectivity. There's no lack of wireless solutions. There's no lack of wired solutions in town. But in this one particular neighborhood, that does not seem to be true. So the research was proposed because we wanted to validate that was true. And we can talk about how we did that. But then also to see what that impact was like, right? So we wanted to really do qualitative interviews and find out what that really meant on the ground and why that wasn't working. So a research project of this style was absolutely the perfect fit. So, and that's where we found the other thing I'll mention at this point was from a project management point of view, it was critical that we had an owner of this, the whole idea. We needed a group in the community, so it wasn't the Internet Society. It wasn't any one of the partner groups that was going to end up owning this thing in the end. This was going to be something that the community was involved in right from the very, very beginning. So that's where Shelley and all of the groups that work with IVNI came into it to find out who was going to kind of oversee this. So that's what started us.
Yeah, and then also just for the research phase that we did is just getting the community voices and getting the different opinions. Like Joel said, when the North End of Winnipeg has the largest urban Indigenous population. And then so just filling that gap in when the pandemic was going on and seeing the digital divide, because other neighborhoods in Winnipeg have that connectivity that the North End doesn't receive. And then so like Joel said, just validating that with the research, and then just getting the different community members, because it isn't just Indigenous people in the North End, there's newcomers, there's a large group of newcomers, settlers in the neighborhood. And so during the research phase, we went to different community events, to different community groups, just to get that wide range of opinions from them.
Yeah, one of our big pushes too was to not duplicate effort, right? Our approach was to build trust and come into and become part of the fabric of the neighborhood, not to come in assuming that nothing else was going on and that we had all the answers and we had the solution. Kick in the door, here, you're welcome, here's a solution. But we also didn't want to duplicate effort. So one of the great successes I think that we had was being able to have these conversations with groups that were already doing stuff and then just being part of that. So originally we had talked about doing our own events, putting on seminars and interviewing people that way. But what we ended up doing, which was a shift, was we went to things like community barbecues or support groups or things that were already happening where community members were going to be. And then we kind of just perched outside and said, hey, are you interested in answering some questions when it came down to it? So we met the community where they were already, not, setting up our own thing and getting just a different subset. So I think those who did participate was a very organic group and a little bit more diverse group than I think we would have had other ways. So yeah, working with those groups and listening to them and having them tell us what would work and what wouldn't work, and then following their lead, that was important. And then when we're asking these questions, actually listening and actually taking that advice, right? So if we're going to credit ourselves with anything, it's following those things that were already happening and then just getting invited in to be part of that space.
Yeah, and then even with the hiring of the research assistants to Indigenous community members, so just making sure that they were comfortable and it was people from the community that were doing the interviews with them was really important to us also. So just having community involved at every level of the research phase.
We also spent first I'll mention too, there was a ton of research before there was research, right? There was before we went for an ethics approval, before we went and did all of that, we were meeting with groups, we were having conversations, we were pitching these ideas, not just about the network, because at that time we were still trying to stay solution independent. We were trying not to have a solution in mind. We were trying to really just understand what the issues were. And not just the problems, but all of the assets as well, right? Like what is in place, what do we have to work with, who's already doing maybe pieces of this, right? So those conversations went on for a long time before there was technically any research being done. And having this approach with the research assistants who are going to be actually there asking the questions, doing the recordings, that kind of stuff was important. To the point where everyone was involved in the question designing as well. So before we went to ethics, when we were packaging it up, the language on the posters was vetted by everybody. The questions themselves were changed 1,000 times. And then even some of the language in the question is interpreted different ways. And we did find a difference between some of the interpretation of the Indigenous community and the newcomer community, just in some of the language too, right? So that part was very interesting, but we spent a lot of time ahead of time before we kind of went ahead with it to make sure that things were appropriate and understandable and respectful and things like that.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating to hear. I think anyone here that does community-based research has hopefully picked up on, there are so many, tips and pieces of wisdom you've already talked about in terms of how to make a community-based research project successful. You mentioned things like, doing that work beforehand, really involving the community, running not just your project ideas, but your research ideas by the community and meeting the community where they're at when you're doing and designing your research methods. Again, there's so many pieces of great advice in what you've said here for folks looking to do community-based research projects. So again, encouraging folks, if you have any questions or want to hear more about any of those aspects, feel free to talk about that in the chat. I want to dig a little bit deeper on one specific aspect that you talked about. And Joel, you'd mentioned it was really important for your group to have this be owned by the community, to bring in that community-based organization, and you chose Indigenous Vision for the North End. Since this is really an on-the-ground organization that you've said already works with dozens of local service groups and community members and things like that. So you brought them in to lead this. And Shelley, you've already talked a little bit about why this was important, but why do you think that engaging the community in this way and having it be led by the community really made a difference in the success of your project?
Yeah, so I did talk a little bit about it, but so the North End has a huge community. I feel like even in other neighborhoods in Winnipeg, you don't have that sense of community that you do in the North End. Like walking down the street, everyone knows each other. You have that sense of belonging and community. So engaging the community is really easy, I feel like, in the North End, and just making those connections and having those important relationships and making sure that they have their voices heard, and just the different needs that every community member has. So that was really important. And then so obviously we want the project to be taken over by the community. It's not going to be just Indigenous Vision for the North End that's going to be, and the Internet Society that's going to be having the project. So it's going to be just completely community led. So having them involved in every level of the project is very important, I would say.
I have one example that that we wouldn't have got, piece of information, a finding that we had that I think is very important, and that I'm almost certain we wouldn't have gotten if we didn't do it this way and we didn't ask the questions the way we did. It's a fairly well-known fact that income and education are two of the main factors, age being the third, of your connectivity, your use of technology and connectivity in the world. The more income, the more education, and depending on your age group, those are indicators of likelihood of you having kind of meaningful connectivity. But under income, I even didn't understand until we went through the transcripts. That's not just cash, right? The one big one was credit. I never really got into it, but often, we talk about low income neighborhood and things like that. You think you can just back a dump truck of money up and away you go and the problem's solved. But it's not just cash that a person may or may not have. It's the fluctuation of it, right? The bad credit was something that would, because you're having a contract with an internet provider, right, in the commercial model. The other one was if you don't have proof of identification, or if you've moved and your address is not matching, your billing address, all those things that you need to enter into a contract with a service provider. That's often a problem. So it was those little nuanced bits that we got from the interviews that really brought life to, what does that big thing mean, income or education, right? We've also been doing digital skills training. We've been doing classes more recently. This is over the last couple of months. And the education side, right? So just talking with people in the community and their feelings about kind of formal education, like their experience in the past about walking into a classroom. Sometimes that's a limit, right? Those barriers, those attitudes, those things that they've had through their childhood. Those were really specific, nuanced things that we needed to take and appreciate so we could build solutions that worked around them. So those were really important things that we got from the community, directly from the mouths of those who were there every day.
And those sound like the type of findings that could almost be missed or misinterpreted if you didn't have the community so involved in the research project the way that you did. So thanks for highlighting kind of some of that, the importance of that, and Shelley, your perspective from Indigenous Visions for the North End, what that was like. Now, you weren't the only project or partner here. This project sounds so complex because it has this research component, it has the training component, it has this really strong community-based component. Then it also has these technical components, and that's a whole different type of specialty and skill that you need, someone that has that technical understanding. So it sounds like Computers for Schools played a really critical role in this technical component, as well as providing the refurbished computers and the networking and doing this at no cost. So Ashton, you were a part of this part of the project. So from your point of view and Computer for Schools point of view, what was it like being a part of this project?
So I'm an intern at Computers for Schools, which basically means that I had previously very limited experience with this kind of technical background. Like I have a college degree and that's pretty much it. Like I don't have on-the-job work experience. And that's what another huge thing that Computers for Schools does is they provide that to new graduates or people who are looking to see if they like that kind of line of work. It gets you that hands-on experience, which is huge because any kind of entry-level technical job nowadays, you need 2 years of experience, and that's entry level. Like, so a huge part is like bridging that divide too. So when I first got hired on, I was told that we were also working alongside another nonprofit organization called the North End Connect, and it was explained to me, and I thought, hey, that's a pretty cool project, and that sounds like something that I might want to look into. One thing kind of led to another. I was just doing my everyday tasks here, and I was asked if I wanted to tag along and get some extra experience on top of the experience I was already getting here. And I've gotten way more experience than I thought that I'd be getting just working on this alone. Most of the stuff that we do here is computer repair. So all those computers that you saw in the video that were being handed out were refurbished here at Computers for Schools, and either by myself or my colleagues, like the other interns. And that's what we do. We're good at fixing computers, and that's what we do. But getting to work on this project specifically, I'm getting way more knowledge in the whole networking aspect of it and the actual connectivity and how things connect to each other, along with like all the little nuances of why we do things certain ways, which is kind of cool to look into. Another huge thing that I've been working on is looking and exploring different software to use. And without getting too technical, everything that we want to try to use is open source, which means you can go on and get it for free. You can tweak it as if it does one thing that you don't quite like, you can change it if you know how to, which is fantastic. Everything's super open. You can see everything. It's well documented. And for a community project like this, it kind of fits perfectly the way that we want to kind of set everything up, if that makes sense.
So what really strikes me is, when we talk about the ways that this research project has moved the dial, it's through this program you've been running, getting those computers out there, getting the connectivity, and that wouldn't have been possible without these connections with you and schools for Computers for Schools. So when we talk about, the things that are important to research projects to be able to make an impact, it's those community partnerships to help really roll out the implementation of the research findings or the projects that lead from them. And it sounds like it was very mutually beneficial as well. The project benefited from having you and your organization partner, and you benefited by being able to learn and get this hands-on experience. It's really neat to hear about. Seen a couple questions start to come in from folks in the chat, so I'll start to address those. One of the first questions that came in was about the equity component of this project. So we've talked about this North End Connect as really being a way that has bridged that digital divide and led to social equity or reducing social inequities caused by the lack of connectivity. So Joel and Shelley and Ashton, is there anything specifically you want to highlight or speak to with regards to the equity component of this project?
For sure. My partners have heard me rant about this too many times, but I'm old enough to remember the early days of the internet, and the internet we have is not the internet we were promised. What we have now has been commercialized and monetized, and it has produced an enormous amount of innovation, and it has its purpose and it has its place. But if you're looking at it from an equity point of view, from a human rights point of view, so much of what we do and so much of our rights and our things that we should have, all of us, are moving on to an online environment, right? So connectivity is a right that everyone should have, because it's a barrier to the other rights that we have already declared that we should have. It should be a basic service. Projects like this do two things. They argue that point, because one of the things is that the commercial model seems to get all of the attention and all of the dollars. So it's kind of a counterpoint to that, and it's addressing a different purpose. It's not an infrastructure for the purpose of extracting dollars and resources out of people for individuals and corporations. It is something that everyone should have. So, and a project like this is a practical, on the ground experiment that shows that, right? This is we're trying to take a monologue currently of what people are being told and turn that into a dialogue where we can have a conversation about where is this appropriate. Where's the commercial model appropriate? At the end of the day, the two models have different objectives, so we're not never necessarily going to come together. So where do we meet, and how do we just get everybody connected?
Yeah. And that's a really interesting perspective. The way you talk about internet and connectivity as not necessarily a human right in and of itself, but these other human rights we have. We're now living in a world where we can't access or exercise those rights without internet connectivity. And in the video, there were things mentioned like even access to our basic social services, health services. A lot of that all requires going through the internet. Jobs and employment and things like that. The one participant in the video spoke about, your job applications, everything's online now. So that it creates this gap or this inequity between those who can and can't access the internet, which you're solving or working towards a solution for within your research and your project. Within the research component too, I'm seeing lots of ways that equity was thought about in the research. Joel, you mentioned kind of meeting people where they're at. And when we think about, recruiting research participants, we think about if we ask people to come to us, there's going to be inequity in who's able to come or interested to come or, has the means for transportation or time off work to come participate in our research. So your model of meeting people where they were at, where folks in the community would already be, you said that helped you reach quite a wider variety of folks. And then having this connection to the Indigenous vision for the North End as well. I wonder, Shelley, is there anything you want to add about kind of the equity lens from your perspective in this project?
Yeah, just like you said, like Joel, it's like we look at it as like a basic human right to have access to internet. And then obviously just everything is online, so it's kind of just difficult. So having that need for the devices itself is important.
There's
And you
also
spoke about this kind of. Go ahead, Joel.
There's an aspect of a conversation or information back to those people who design these systems. And COVID pushed a lot of things online, and a lot of businesses and a lot of, especially government services, aren't coming back from that necessarily. A lot of physical offices were closed. A lot of places where people used to go, community centers, libraries, things like that, have closed down, or they packaged up their computer lab or whatever, and they haven't brought it back. So there's a number of factors that are driving this, making it worse. We run our classes at the St. John's Library, which is the neighborhood library, and we heard from them an interesting stat that they have attendance. They keep attendance record of everybody that comes, and then obviously it dropped to zero when they closed for COVID. But what's interesting is all the libraries in the city the uptake after COVID has been less, except in the North End. There's actually more people having to go to the library now to use their computer lab or their services, or get help with whatever resumes or applying for things, than the other libraries around the city. So that's an interesting kind of aspect of this as well, is that and it was basically what we predicted, was that this was a long-term problem and it wasn't going to get a long-term it wasn't going to change without a long-term solution. So taking those things into consideration and get these devices into people's homes so they don't have to go to these shared locations.
So just while we're on this topic of equity, there's a question in the chat about if you find any gender gap in connectivity. And then I have a bit of a follow-up to that after you address that. Did you find any gender gap in connectivity?
I think no, as far as just who has devices, who doesn't, who connects. But I would venture to say that there might be a gender difference in the impact of lack of connectivity, if that makes sense. What we're kind of framing too, is that you paint a picture of what it means if you don't have a device in your home. And this is simple, like check your email, right? If your only access to your email is a community library or a community center that you're going to, you have to leave your home, go through the streets of Winnipeg. You're not going to do that. There's times that you can be there. Who's watching your kids while you go do that? Are you bringing them with you, right? Like all these kinds of human factors about what does that impact? So like for me, I check my email, I lift up my phone, I look, there's no email, I'm on done, right? 1 second. Other people, they're physically having to, take a bus, incur a cost, go there, wait for someone to be off the computer, get some help with the computer. There's all these number of factors. And I think that we got more reporting of that from females, because they tend to have those tasks associated with them more. So the amount of effort that they had to go through and the things they had to consider and the costs they incurred to do a simple thing that most of us take for granted, like checking something on a website or checking your email or communicating with a family member, things like that.
Yeah.
And I think even we had more women that were interested in being interviewed compared to men. So like even just finding some men to be to do the research interviews was a little bit difficult, because that's something obviously we want to hear perspectives from men too, but it was mostly, I feel like, females that were willing to participate in the interview too.
So not necessarily an inequity in connectivity or access, but inequity in the impact that can have on folks to not have that. So I guess kind of my follow-up question to this, because you talked about, the North End, there's kind of this hole where there is less inequity or less access to internet. And when we think about that from an equity lens, sometimes we'll think about certain populations that are impacted more in equity than others. So are there certain, populations, sub-demographics, things like that are more likely to be impacted by this inequity or this lack of connectivity just because they live in the North End where this hole exists?
I think probably age is, and probably on both ends of it. The older the population gets, tends to be a combination of two things. One, they don't have access or they don't have supports in place to help them get the access, but they also don't necessarily see a value in it. Not that there isn't value, but they haven't used it. It's not worth it. It's not the way that they lived their life, 50 years ago, and that's just what they do. So on that end, I think that there's definitely a larger number of people. As you get older, that number will increase. And then, but the younger, I don't think it's a lack of desire, but it's a lack of access compiled with the amount of demand on it. So schools, even employment in the early days, and where they just assume that you have this access. contact to you, the amount of homework that you get that's requires digital access, those kinds of things. So I think the impact is higher on both ends of the age spectrum. One, because we just assume, we even have the term like, oh, digital natives, these kids have grown up with cell phones in their hands, so they must know everything about tech, which is, research shows that's not true, right? They might be a whiz at TikTok, but they're not, you can't use Word or Excel, right? So I think on the outer ends of the age spectrum, that's where you'll see the biggest impact.
Mm-hmm. And there was another question in the chat that kind of digs into this even further, looking specifically at anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism. So this question here, when we work towards kind of this equity in digitalization and access to connectivity, does that, or how does it create opportunities for addressing anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, colonization, et cetera? Does it provide opportunities in terms of these groups climbing up employment and socioeconomic ladders? Is there anything anyone wants to share in that respect?
Yeah, I think that it for sure, like especially this project, and then the North End having such a high Indigenous population also, creates these opportunities. Like we have digital navigators, so creating employment with those, and then also our digital skills classes that we do. So offering that, so having the education component and then creating jobs also. We have some youth council groups that are from some of our organizations in the North End. So working with them too with youth is really important. And then also working with newcomer groups also. So I attended an event called the Indigenous Orientation Toolkit. So just sharing that too with the groups for newcomers that are coming. So to just end those stereotypes and the things that come with that.
I think we often think when we're thinking about the internet and who's connected to it, because like 50% of the world's population still really doesn't have meaningful connection to it. And just because it is physically available in an area doesn't mean it's actually utilized, right? So some of the numbers and the stats that we hear, we get wrapped up in a lot of speed things, a lot of technology people don't understand. But we often look at it as, what the person is not getting from the internet, which is absolutely true, right? If you don't have a connection, you don't have access to information, you don't have these things. But the other side of the flip side is all of us who do have connection, the content of the network, the voices on the network, the interactions that we have are missing half of the population of the planet, right? So when it comes to equity, if you're not connected to that space, not only are you not able to be involved, but those who are involved, we're having a conversation and we're only asking half of the people. So there's entire perspectives, there's entire conversations that are not being brought to our attention. So when people, the decision makers, the politicians, and the technology people who are designing things are doing that based on what they hear, they're only hearing literally half the story. What would we do and how would we design things? How would we frame things if we could have everybody involved in that conversation? So being disconnected affects both sides, those who are currently on and those who are off, bringing everyone to it, which was the original vision of this infrastructure that we all paid for with our taxes. Having everybody involved in it as a public utility is really what the vision would be, and that would bring everyone involved. So again, like I said, it's not the answer, it is just a tool, but it is potentially a vehicle to other answers so that other people and researchers and other topics can be better served.
A couple key points I think that came out of what you, Shelley, and you, Joel, said there. I mean, Shelley, it's kind of twofold in terms of employment, that this project is actually creating employment opportunities because you are employing Indigenous youth folks from the North End community as part of the project. But then by giving them access to the internet, you're also allowing them to access employment opportunities, develop resumes, see online job postings, things like that. And then Joel, you're talking about this kind of this inclusion into the conversation of these voices that have historically been missing from the conversation, the digital conversation, because they haven't had the access. I'll ask one final question that came in the chat before we wrap things up. More of a technical question. So Joel or Ashton, I think this one might be for you. Canada is one of the more expensive places in the world to get internet service. So how did you deal with that in the North End so that individuals and groups can afford internet service?
Yeah, currently, the vision for this is going to be pay what you can style, so no cost or low cost. But the way we're doing that is by we're not creating another commercial infrastructure. The infrastructures that exist are doing their thing and they're serving certain people. What we're trying to build is something that is absolutely just basic to serve some needs. So we're using retired equipment, things that are not state of the art. We're not looking at 5G or satellites or anything fancy. We're using equipment that others have already cycled out. But if you're looking at accessing web pages and checking your email, it's perfectly fine for the speeds that we're getting and the quality we're getting. So this is a do-it-yourself kind of level as far as infrastructure goes. Is it going to be perfect? No. But we're going to then pass that on. So any money that's brought into it is kept in the co-op itself, used to supply the technology or expand the network, pay for the employees or any of the students that are going to be learning on this thing. And then that goes, the benefits from this financial and non-financial stay in the community. So we're not just outsourcing this to other groups or anything. So that's what the intent was. And because it's open source and because we're connected, we're bypassing other service providers, the community gets to make up those rules. They get to determine what is going to be put on the network and how it's managed and things like that. So it's a very unique style where we're bringing kind of the non-financial benefits to the community as well.
Very neat to hear. I guess final question, just because there was a comment that folks are looking forward to reading your paper. Where will they find that? Will it be posted on the North End Connect website when it is out?
Yes. Yeah. Right now it's the Journal of Community Informatics is where we plan to publish. And once we have it, we will share it openly. We do have a GitHub for on the technical side. Anybody who wants to geek out on the technical side, all of the research that we did for the quantitative data we're sharing, so that could be reused if you wanted to, using a Jupyter Notebook style code to go through the data that we have from CIRA, and it's all explained in the GitHub, and I think we're posting it in chat. And then we also are running a script on the computers that we're giving away that's helping to run that speed test data. So we've shared that code as well. So if anyone has a similar project, you can contact us, or it's right there in a GitHub. So everything that we're doing, the information, the research, even the technical stuff, as much as we possibly can, we're sharing all of the stuff as we go. So the intent of this is to be able to be replicated somewhere else if anybody, any other place has a similar problem.
Just fantastic. And I think another way this project is working towards equity, that you're not, gatekeeping your research and your things within an institution or organization, but you're sharing it. So we're going to wrap things up now very quickly here. I'll share my screen just for some final wrap up before everyone gets on with their day today. As I said, this is recorded. So if you would like to rewatch this webinar, share it with others, anything like that, you can do so on our website, and I've put the link in the chat there. Our next e-learning event coming up for the month of October is on co-creating just sustainabilities, presented by the Lake Superior Living Labs Network. So we'll hear a bit about environmental sustainability and co-creating ideas for that with community. Link to the Eventbrite page is in the chat for anyone who'd like to sign up. Our e-news is the best place to keep informed on what else is going on, what other events we have coming up in our e-learning series, as well as our community of practice, as well as training, workshop opportunities and things like that. You can sign up for our newsletter using the link I put in the chat there. And finally, we would love your feedback on this e-learning event. You can scan that QR code there with your phone or device, or click the link I just put on the chat if you would like to share your feedback with us. Once again, thank you so much to the presenters, the panelists, Joel and Shelley and Ashton, both for your presentation today, as well as all the work you've been doing in your research project and in the North End Connect program. So thank you so much, folks. We are going to stop the recording and end the event for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.